Well, I guess we can get started. It's now 1:01. Should we just wait a few minutes, Vera? What do you think?
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. Okay. Well, welcome everybody to today's second Zoom meeting for that is going to, and we're very, very pleased to welcome Vera, Dr. Vera Tarman today. And she's there. Oh, here's some more people. I'll just wait a second and let them in. It's so cute how the doorbell rings when you let people into Zoom.
Yeah.
So Dr. Vera Tarman has agreed, very kindly agreed to we do a sort of a Q&A today, and I have a set of questions that I'll be discussing with Vera. But for sure, everybody can jump in when you feel like you want to say something. Just introduce yourself with your name and say, you know, I'd like to add to that, or whatever you want to do. And I guess we can start with the question now. Has anybody here read her book?
I have.
Karen has, Andy has.
No, but I'm going to get it.
Okay, great. So that was my next question. It's available on Amazon. You can get, I got the iPad version and I got the audio version. So I was listening to it in bed and I was reading it on my balcony in the dark at night. So I read the book, and the great thing about the iPad version is that you can highlight a lot of things that you want to look back at. Or you can just buy the paper version and buy a highlighter and help yourself out with reminders. What's that noise?
I don't know.
Sounds like something squeaking. So anyways, so I'm just going to start.
Maybe if you just let everyone know they can mute themselves while the speaker's speaking, and then if they have questions, they can unmute themselves.
Yeah. Okay, great. And you can also, we have a chat window, so if you want to post any questions there in the chat window while we're talking, to remind us to get back to the question, or to remind yourself, because I'm old at 60 years old and I forget all the time. So if you're listening and you think, oh my God, I want to ask that, just put it in the chat window and we can get back to it afterwards. All right. So my first thing that I wanted to talk about, or the first question, is and Vera and I met on Friday, and we put a couple of points and questions together, and the first one. Just to let you know a little bit about the book, or Vera, actually, why don't you talk a little bit about the idea behind the book in a Cole's Note version?
Okay, Cole's Notes version. Hello, everybody. I recognize some names, so those of you who know me, you'll be hearing some of the same material, but it's good to see you again. The Cole's Note version is the book Food Junkies. It's a second edition. The second edition is called Recovery from Food Addiction. Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. It is essentially, I like to think of it as a reader-friendly, public-friendly expose on food addiction. Is it real? Does it exist? What's the science behind it? What's the clinical presentation? Like, what does it look like? And then the second edition more so, what are some of the solutions? What is the solution? And then different stories, lots of stories throughout the book to illustrate the failures and successes of people. I guess that's really the Cole's Notes version of it. Yeah.
And for our American friend, Cole's Note is like a cheap book that we used to buy growing up in the 70s if we didn't have time to finish the book when we went to high school.
Right.
So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, does it have to be as extreme as abstinence from sugar in order to do this?
You know, that's a question better to ask later, because it involves having to explain all the stuff about food addiction. But the short answer, the Cole's Note version, is yes, it does. But,
okay, so we'll back up then. What foods are addictive?
Well, okay, so what foods are addictive? Basically, you know, when people talk about the idea of food addiction, they'll almost always say, what do you mean food addiction? You have to eat food, so it can't be addictive. Well, you have to have sex. You have to have, well, you don't have to, but you know what I mean. You have to do lots of things. And it doesn't mean that you're an addict. You have to drink, but it doesn't mean you have to drink alcoholically. When we say food addiction, there's and then from that question, or from where I'm going from, then we'll get into what specific foods are addictive. But really what we mean is refined carbohydrates, at least at the initial state. And really what we mean by that is sugar. Because the concept of food addiction is that it's a chronic progressive disease, and early stage might just be sugar and refined carbs. So some people will say, we shouldn't call it food addiction, we should just call it sugar addiction. And others will say, let's call it refined carb addiction. And then people like me who are in the addiction field say, well, you know what, sometimes at the extreme level, it can actually be any food, including healthy food. Like I heard somebody say earlier while we were waiting that they were overeating on even healthy food. So the easiest, the closed note version of what foods are addictive, it always starts with sugar and then refined carbs. And what I mean by that is like, can I talk about specific foods in this group?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like some groups we have to be very vague about what we're talking. You have to the white stuff, or the doughy stuff. So specifically sugar, so that is anything from juice to pop, soda pop, to alcohol, to candy, to overt sugar that you add to your food, like sugar in coffee or sugar in your whatever, your sauce of something you're making, all the way to refined carbs, which will mean like the muffins and the cakes and the bread, cereal, that sort of stuff. So those are the sort of major addictive foods. Somebody actually did a study to determine what specific foods there were. Like this was somebody who thought, well, that would be interesting to actually designate foods. And I actually have that here. I'm going to read you off a list of some of these things. They did like the top 20 things that were addictive. And the number one, nobody's going to be surprised, was chocolate. So it's number one, chocolate, because chocolate actually covers quite a few addictive substances within it.
And what was it that you mentioned in your book about the chemical release of chocolate is the similar as the chemical release for
opiates?
The opiate, yeah, that's.
Yeah. Well, that too, can I answer that later? Because that's easier answered when I talk about the neurochemicals. So let me just go down the list. So ice cream was second on the list. And then this really surprised me. French fries and pizza were next. Now, a lot of times guys will say, I don't really eat the cakes and candies. I eat the man foods like pizza and barbecued ribs and stuff like that, which of course have sugar on them, like the fried chicken and stuff like that. So that would fit there. So they're eating like the number 3 on the list, so French fries, pizza. Then we look into cookies and chips and cake. Cheeseburgers in the top 10. Popcorn is in the top numbers as well. And right at the very bottom, what's not addictive is things like broccoli and cucumber and carrots, even though there's sugar in carrots, and bananas, even though bananas are very sweet. So an easy way to think of it is sugar and anything that has been processed, like the carbs that have been processed to make foods basically pre-digested so that they're almost sugar. That's what's the most addictive, to answer that question. Part of the reason why these things are so addictive is because they're pre-digested. And in the addictive part of the brain that gets hijacked, anything that you get a lot of, so cookies, dough, it's a lot of sugar, and if it's been pre-digested, that means it's going to be absorbed more quickly. So anything that you get a lot of and that has high quick absorption is more addictive. So broccoli, which is a complex carb and has sugar, takes like 2 hours to break down into sugar. That's too slow for the brain. It wants
what about pasta and rice?
Yeah, well, that's getting close. So we have something that's called, nutritionists have something that's called the glycemic index, which is how quickly carbohydrates break down into sugar. And so broccoli is, I don't actually have the numbers in front of me, but 30 or 40 and 100 is sugar. And what did you say, bread?
No, I said pasta and rice.
Yeah, pasta. Well, pasta
And bread too.
bread is closer. It's like 80 or something like that. So it's pretty close to sugar. From a food addiction point of view, I would say that's just a bit of slow-mo sugar. It's going to be a problem. Maybe not as quickly as just downing a thing of sugar, but it's pretty close. Now you said pasta and rice. So rice is it's a grain, and it's a little bit more closer to that sort of middle line. There used to be something called the glycemic index diet. Like for those of you who've been around for quite a while, will probably remember that one about 20 years ago. And some people could get away with rice or brown rice, or actually more specifically wild rice. So whatever makes the body have to actually do some of the processing, slows it down, makes it less addictive. It's kind of like when somebody's trying to quit smoking. You know, smoking is the fastest way to the brain. So tobacco, you get addicted pretty quickly. But if you take the nasal stuff, that's pretty addictive too. Vaping, by the way, is no help at all. But you throw the patch on your skin when you're trying to quit smoking, that's slower to the brain, and so therefore less addictive. If we could actually put sugar into a patch, it would probably be, well, probably Brussels sprouts is a version of that. It slows things down.
Right.
Yeah.
So do you have a, so going back to the original question about abstinence from sugar,
Yeah.
and do you have a philosophy on how to stop eating sugar? Do you wean yourself off slowly? Do you go cold turkey?
That's a question that the people who are in the field of food addiction and are dealing with this struggle with all the time. It's like the big question. If you're trying to make a business and attract customers, you're probably going to go with the go slow, because people are just terrified to quit sugar and are less likely to stay with you. So often there's a kind of slow, let's just ease you off slowly. Stop with the pop first and the booze, then stop with, you still get to eat rice and bread and that kind of stuff. And then gradually you go down. If I have the luxury to say with my clientele, what is the best, fastest, most successful way, I would say cold turkey abstinence. But that freaks people out, it scares them. But it's the best way. And I know that because I work at a place called Renascent. And Renascent is a drug and alcohol treatment center. And a couple of years ago, we had a donor that funded over 80 people within a year to come into the program. So I got to see a pattern of behavior that felt pretty reliable. It wasn't a study per se, but it was a lot of clinical knowledge that was gained. And my experience there, where we locked people up for a month so that they couldn't sneak and eat, like night eat at night, because if they snuck down, the counselor would nab them. They couldn't sneak in some kind of bar in their purse, because literally people's purses were checked. So there was no gradual erosion of eating sweets, because it was cold turkey and we walked. And it took people about 2 weeks before they suffered, they grumbled, they grunted, they hated it. And in about 2 weeks, it was like, oh my God, it's so much better. And I don't see that with the people who do it gradually.
Well, the thing is that's so interesting, and what we talked about on Friday was about the fact that sugar was actually never taken out of our diet. Even the month before my surgery, where I was on OptiFast, there's sugar in OptiFast. So right after the surgery, we all received our binder from the Ontario Bariatric Network, our nutritional guide, and in the nutritional guide, it over and over again, it tells us to drink Premier protein drinks, which had sugar in it as well. So a lot of the items that we were eating right after our surgery had sugar. And so we were never abstinent from the sugar, even during this journey from day one. or even before the surgery with the
Yeah.
optic test.
That's right.
So the thing is that we were kind of not set up for failure, but our brains and the chemical makeup of the sugar was never depleted from us.
Exactly.
Now,
Yeah. Can I
the
just
other
come in there
thing
for
I
a
just
second?
wanted to add one little thing.
Okay.
Is that I just wondering whether or not this chemical release that reacts when you have sugar, is it there the same chemical release when you have a sweetener?
Um, yeah, but can I go back to the other point? That's another good question, but
Yeah.
let me go back to the other point because it relates to the question before. So there you were, you had your surgery, and you've never really been introduced to you've had sugar all along. And see, what ends up happening is when the sugar is in the system, which is, you know, from the point of view that I'm presenting here, it's an addictive substance. It keeps that craving constantly on a low grade ebb so that you're never satisfied. Again, like somebody was talking about before we started, there's a constant sense of hunger, which is this craving because it feels like hunger, and it's never fully satisfied. So it's a bit like somebody who's trying to quit smoking. You know, they go from a pack a day to half a pack to, you know, I don't know, a few cigarettes. They're still craving that cigarette, and all they're doing is white knuckling. They're instead of having 20 a day, they're having 5, but they're wanting that other 15 because the 5 is keeping the desire alive for the 15. And anybody can handle 2 weeks of hell, like I said in our program. But if you prolong that to months and months and months of constant craving, you're going to break down. It's like you never let that hump that you want to get over done with. And so and then what ends up happening is a person has a sense of deprivation. When I go down from my this much sugar to this much, I go through cravings and hunger, so that the moment you think about it again, it's a negative association. Nobody wants to do it. It's just like, ugh, what a life. Whereas somebody else, when it's 2 weeks and then you're free, the association is, I will actually feel better. Which is why I think it makes a lot more sense psychologically as well as biologically to do the cold turkey, even though it is hell. I mean, there's a couple of people on the site here who went through the program who could probably explain what hell it was like and then what it was like when you got up.
I think that's from Veronica. Veronica, are you able to mute yourself, or I'll mute you? I'll mute her. It's okay. I'll give it.
No, she
Sometimes there's feedback.
Yeah.
And so that's why you get this squealing noise. Sorry to interrupt you, Vera. So so going back to the cold turkey sugar.
Yeah, it was really just to say that cold turkey is hard, but the other one is also hard because you get associated with that feeling of deprivation. And when I think about not eating sugar, my immediate thought, because I haven't eaten sugar for so long, is not deprivation, but relief from obsession. But for somebody who hasn't had that experience like you, with your description of always having sugar, it's going to always feel like deprivation, and it's going to be like, I don't want to do that. Who wants to live that way? We have to break down that fear as well.
Right.
Now,
right. So the second point about sweeteners.
Right. So sweeteners are one of those things that are they're in the gray area. A person who is trying to quit, we want to quit the sugar because the sugar causes an insulin response. There's a whole lot of things that's happening. There's a physical, there's physiological, there's the biological piece about addiction, which sweeteners seem, even though they have their own negative profile, you know, we worry about what's the cancer risk and things like that. I would still say that they are a better option if you have to choose. And if you are going to do that gradual process of no sugar, I'll do sweeteners again instead, I would say, okay, let's do that. That would be as far as I would go with my abstinence thing, is quit the sugar, do the sweeteners, with the idea in mind of eventually getting off of those. If you can circuit that hole and just jump past that, do. But if you can't, the sweeteners are fine. Sweeteners aren't perfect though, because, well, we're worried about the health consequences, but also they have an anticipation of sweet. And you may still end up eating more because even though you're anticipating the sweet, you're actually not getting the sugar, the sweet. So you're going to keep wanting to eat. Like it doesn't have a sense of satisfaction to it. And it's potentially problematic too, but it's a fine in between step. If a person is really severely food addicted, they may not be able to do that. Like basically, our line is always, you know, when we're trying to, this is called the fine tuning. You quit the sugar and then you do the fine tuning. Can you eat grains? Can you eat sweeteners? Can you eat dairy? Some people can't do any of those three. You just always ask the question, are you still craving? Are you still hungry when you shouldn't be? And if you are, then there's still something driving the craving.
Yeah.
And if you're,
you remarked in your book about Einstein's remark that insanity can be defined as continuing to do the same thing repeatedly
right.
while expecting a different outcome is often cited in the field of addiction treatment.
Yeah,
repeating the same self-destructive behavior despite negative consequences in hope of a positive outcome is a hallmark symptom of addiction.
That's
and this
right.
is what is called denial. It provides the foundation of distorted thought process, which is popularly known as stinking thinking.
Yes. Yes, that's it. You got it. The stinking thinking is a characteristic feature of addiction. And when you see yourself doing it or somebody else doing it, it's kind of like the yes buts, you know, yeah, I know I should do this, but there's probably an addiction dynamic happening in the background.
But the thing that makes what we all suffer from so uniquely different than drug, alcohol addiction and smoking addiction is that we have to eat to stay alive.
Yes, we do.
Oh, look, there we go. Sandy's got her celery stick. Excellent.
But this is the
Yeah, you spoke about a woman that went from sugar to, with her addictive nature, to eating carrots all day long and turned orange.
Yeah, that actually happens. You get a hue of yellowish orange, believe it or not. Yes, that's right. But that's where we start getting into second and third and fourth stages of food addiction, because it's a progressive thing. But just to go to the first point that you made, it's like the alcoholic says, I can't drink. Well, that means I have to be able to drink. Well, you don't have to be able to drink alcohol. You can drink water. You don't have to drink juice. You can drink water. You don't have to drink Coca-Cola. You can drink water. So that kind of normalizing that we do, that the food industry does for us, to say that foods like muffins and cakes and protein bars are food rather than what they really are, which are processed products. It's part of the stinking thinking that the food industry sits on. You know, it makes me feel like it's normal to have a dessert every day. It's not normal. It's not necessary. And it's only normal because everybody else is doing it. And that's only the case because the food industry has done that. I mean, I didn't grow up that way, but my kids are growing up that way.
Well, that was the interesting thing that I noticed recently, that somebody posted a picture of the nutritional facts of a package of instant oatmeal from England and a package of instant oatmeal from the US. And that the instant oatmeal from the US is jam-packed with sugars and chemicals that are sugars that we don't even know what they're called, compared to Europe. That in Europe, the obesity problem is not as predominant as it is in North America. And simply because a lot of these chemicals are not in the food products that you buy in the stores, unlike in US and Canada.
Yeah, that's right. And we don't even notice that because we become habituated to that and then have the expectation. In other words, we become tolerant to the higher levels. So we don't even notice that we're eating more, as it were.
Yes. So the other thing that we were talking about is cross addiction.
Yeah. Okay. So cross addiction is when you move from one addiction to another. And I saw that a lot in my Renascent program, which, is a drug and alcohol treatment program. And what we had this.
Oh, sorry. Here, I'll mute Peggy's phone. I don't know what's going on there.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, we had, it's a drug and alcohol treatment program, and then we had this special stream for food addicts. And what we saw happening is that people that came in with alcohol addiction and cocaine addiction just ended up picking up the food and eating a ton of food, way more than they did before, even before they picked up their, let's say, drug, their alcohol was, alcohol, pardon me, their drug was alcohol. They would either remember that they had eaten a lot of sugar when they were younger and then stopped when they picked up alcohol, or just ended up eating a lot. So what ended up happening is they have this addiction, which then when they stop, the brain, it's all about addiction. It's not about the substance per se. The substance is, you may have what we call DOC, or drug of choice. And that drug of choice could be sugar, it could be alcohol, it could be cocaine, but it's very easy when you stop that to pick up something else. That's the transfer addiction. And sometimes in the clinical world, we say a person is co-addicted because they're using both, they're straddling both. And I see that happening a lot with alcohol and sugar, for example. So that concept of cross addiction is very, I mean, it's really just saying we're addicted. We're just addicted. But you may have what's called the gate, oh my gosh, what's it called now? Not gatekeeper, gate opener. I can't remember what the term is, but you start off with one drug that doesn't sound that bad. Thank you, gateway.
Gateway drug.
Yes, and often the gateway drug in the past was cigarettes, and then it was marijuana, and then it was, the harder drugs per se. But now that we're recognizing the potency of sugar, I think that sugar is a perfect gateway drug for other drugs, because what happens? You started to gain weight, so you start smoking and whatnot. Yeah. So,
yeah, you also mention in your book that there is a rise in alcohol use as many bariatric patients
yes.
Start drinking more, because it is basically a slider food.
Yes, that's right. That's right. So, if it was sugary foods before the surgery, once they've had the surgery, one of the things that we've learned about the surgery is that it decreases the amount that a person can eat, but it also causes some level of malabsorption, so that the more refined stuff gets absorbed more quickly. And that's like alcohol, like you call it a slider food. You can fit as much as you want of that stuff in, just like ice cream and stuff like that. But it also goes through the brain more quickly. It's more quickly absorbed. And the brain loves anything that's a lot and goes to the brain more quickly, so that the person is more predisposed to alcoholism as well as sugar addiction, because both of those are, beating the few Brussels sprouts that you're able to eat, or whatever else you're able to eat. I think that that's one of the reasons why the bariatric surgeons should really be listening to a talk like this, because I know that there are some who are very aware of the potency for alcohol post-bariatric surgery, but it's not my impression that that's widely accepted. Maybe you have different experience now, and certainly not food, not yet.
Well, that's the interesting thing with where I had my surgery at Toronto Western, and we had our bariatric, biweekly bariatric meetings, and we had a team of 2 or 3 different nutritionists. And although they're kind of on the same page, that we were still offered different information than what you see otherwise in the U.S. or any other sort of Facebook bariatric group. And of course, I wanted to touch on. Are you still there? Oh yeah, Vera's still there. Yep. I wanted to touch on a very big topic in the bariatric community, and that is the keto diet.
Ah, right. Okay, so I saw somebody had mentioned something in the chat. I'm not able to look at the chat because I'm paying attention, but occasionally I saw that word, that protein and fats are satisfying. Yeah, the keto diet has the, I want to say, they stumbled inadvertently on a solution for food addiction. It's not the only solution, but it is one, because keto is primarily a focus on fats and then proteins and very low carb, and the low carb movement it fits with the keto, but there's also just a low carb movement as well. And medical clinicians who are in the know about how to treat diabetes successfully are very low carb. But anyway, you're certainly not eating refined carbs. If you're going to eat carbs, they're going to be, like the vegetables and the lesser sweet fruits, like berries, for example. So just by virtue of not using that many carbs, remember, carbs are the first thing that is addictive. They've kind of stumbled on a food addiction program. And so for people who are following a keto diet, it's less bulk, and it's less addictive. It's very successful, and it's fine. The problem with the keto diet is you still need to know about food addiction, because the keto diet, like the bariatric bars that are given, like the vegan stuff, like any food platform that's good, has its little sneaky processed food products which will trip you up. And I've seen people do a keto diet very successfully, and then they start doing those keto bars and those keto cheesecakes and all that kind of stuff, and then they're starting to get into the potentially addictive stuff, and then everything's lost. And one of the things we know with addiction, and we know this with obesity too, is that when you relapse and come back, it's even harder to get back on board. Like every time it gets harder. It doesn't mean you should keep trying, but it gets harder. You gain more weight, you gain more cravings. It's just harder. If you know, avoid the stuff that's addictive, then a keto diet is actually, you can live on it for years. It's just that people don't know that.
Well, the interesting thing about, for my own journey, because I'm now 2 years out, is that, we're a lot of people are talking about the COVID-19 weight gain, and especially in the weight loss community. You're home alone, or you're home all day long. Your kitchen is 2 feet away, and you're confronted with boredom. So what do? When you're bored, you eat.
Yes.
And you can't go outside as much now. The weather's a bit better, but in the first few months, in February, March, April, when the weather was horrible, you were inside all day long and confronted with your old demons of overeating and eating stuff you shouldn't be eating, and not being able to go to the gym, burn some calories, and just keep everything in perspective. And slowly, every week, 1 pound comes back on.
Yes.
And so, as far as when would be the optimal time, if you do decide you want to do cold turkey and cut the sugar out, is now the best time? Because what you talk about, and one of the examples of one of the people in the book is about a woman who quit the sugar, but she was at a birthday party and her best friend was saying, oh, just have one little sliver of cake. Kind of reminded me immediately of that Monty Python, that big giant man in a restaurant, and the waiter came up to him and said, oh, you can eat one little paper thin mint, and then he explodes for having the one mint. But the fact that we're all in quarantine, or sort of self-quarantine, we're not seeing our family and friends as much, and we're certainly not going to parties, is now the optimal time to try and cut the sugar out?
Well, that's such an interesting thing, because a lot of people will say now's not the time because of the stress and the isolation, and what am I going to do with myself? But it actually makes a lot of sense that now is the time, because you don't have that social cue in your face. And if you, so I actually think it's a good time, but you're going to have to put things in place, like your stinking thinking. And, remember I said earlier that food addiction is a chronic progressive thing. And there's people who can say, no, I'm not going to eat this stuff, and that's it. And their willpower works really well because they're at an early stage where willpower may still work. But if you're at that stage later on where you can talk yourself into anything because you're bored, or, well, that looks good, and it's in your face, you're going to have to apply some tools. And if you recognize this as an addiction, these tools are available to you. So one of them is out of sight, out of mind. You're going to have to, if you're at home, the food is in your face, don't have it in your face anymore. Like some of the tools will have to be more overt. Like my fridge is only filled with the foods that are safe to eat, or that are foods that I'm willing to eat, and I'm going to get rid of the other stuff. Personally, if a person moves at a certain point beyond like stage 3 or stage 4 of food addiction, we even have people weighing and measuring their foods, because to eyeball your food or count on your own assessment of what is okay to eat is lost. And so even if you're at home, even if it's there, if you've eaten your allotment for breakfast and lunch, you're not going to the fridge because you've already had your amount. So you have to put false rules, artificial rules around your food, like almost like fences or cages around your food. And then you can actually stop. I actually think that you can stop, but you still need to have social connection. It doesn't have to be face to face. It can be Zoom like this, or it can be a phone call or email, but you still need to have help, because stinking thinking is very powerful. But
well, the thing is
that addiction tools. Sorry.
Yes. Sorry to interrupt. And what you mentioned now with the Zoom meeting, and this is for me a great example of a lot of us are sort of drowning with not having any connection with our own clinics anymore, and with other people, and being able to experience something that you all have experienced and know firsthand what it's like, having had the surgery, and then how to get your mind set to not regain the weight that you've lost, or find a way. And in the case of Marion, who we talked about last week, she has a whole purse full of medications that she has to take, and that the medications that somebody is taking for whatever ailment could also affect your weight loss, if you want to touch on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely, that's true. So, I mean, we know, for example, like a lot of people who deal with obesity also have diabetes or pre-diabetes, and they're on medication they're either on insulin or on other medication. And, one of the sad ironies about getting your diabetes righted through medication, not through food, but through medication, is that you gain weight. Like it's a sad irony that the sugar that's been that's sitting in the blood now gets transported into the fat cells and feeds the fat cells. So there's already a problem right there, and that's not something you can do anything about in terms of adjusting the medication. If you have a doctor who is in the know, they will say you've got to do low carb with this, because otherwise that's what's going to happen. If you don't, then you're going to gain the weight, and that must be terribly discouraging. So there's that piece. And then, so many people, I think 2/3 of the population are on antidepressants or antipsychotics, not because they're psychotic, but because it helps their anxiety and sleep. And those drugs are real culprits for making a person want even more sugar than they would otherwise want, because it actually affects the whole endocrine blood hormonal thing, so that it actually makes you pre-diabetic, and therefore you want sugar. It's unfortunate that these are the things that are meant to help people, but actually make the situation worse.
All right. So the other thing I wanted to talk about was intermittent fasting.
Oh yeah. Okay. Intermittent fasting, in the language of people who have been on diets left and right, the other term for that is just, I'm going to starve myself. Intermittent fasting which we all know, I mean, we're here in this Zoom meeting, presumably because it worked and then it stopped working. Starving yourself just makes you get into the restricting, purging cycle of starving, overstuffing, starving, overstuffing, and every time you do that, you gain more weight. I think it's a pretty dangerous way to, just like over-exercising, it's a pretty dangerous way to control weight or attempt to control weight. But intermittent fasting has gotten a very respectable name in the diabetic community and in the medical community, because it's a great way to reset, I guess, a pre-diabetic state. Because essentially you're not eating sugar, and in fact, not only are you not eating sugar, you're not eating food. And you can control that through, there's different types of intermittent fasting. There's the 1 in 3, like 1 day out of 3 you don't eat very little. I think it's like 600 calories or something like that. Or there's the more popular one where you eat for only 6 hours in a day and the rest of the time you don't eat. And then presumably in that 6 hours you can have whatever you want. It may work for non-food addicts. It may work for somebody who's just got a diabetic problem. I mean, I've listened to some of the people, like Jason Fung he's the leader in Toronto in the diabetic community that's come up with this idea of intermittent fasting. He's a young guy who does not have food addiction. And even he talks about how he gets hungry sometimes, but he deals with it. Look, I'm a food addict. When I get hungry, that is a major trigger for me. And all I'm thinking about is food. And that's dangerous. That's dangerous territory for me. So I'm not a fan personally or clinically, as a doctor, for promoting intermittent fasting, although I see the medical value. It's a medical intervention. I would prefer that a person eat non-processed food, non-sugar foods. They'll get the same benefit, although it'll take a little bit longer. And you won't be hungry, and so then you won't be craving, and also you won't be binging.
Yeah, so one of the things that I asked you was, well, what do you eat if you have cut out flour and sugar? And yeah, so what do you eat?
Well, okay, so that it's that would be a bit like a person who does like the keto diet. Now I don't follow keto diet specifically, but that would be anything from just eating proteins like chicken and salmon and fish and all that kind of stuff, and fatty stuff like avocado and nuts and seeds, all the way to all of the above for me. But I also eat a lot of complex carbs. So that means Brussels sprouts and cauliflower, lettuce, green beans, and a little bit of fruit, very little, but a little bit of fruit, 8 ounces in the morning. So it's basically real food. I mean, there's a term, just eat real food.
Great meeting.
So not processed food. That's the simple, that's the Coles Notes version. How do you eat a healthy, still full food plan that will not be making you have cravings? Just don't eat processed food and don't drink processed food. And that includes the cute little bars, the protein bars and shakes and drinks and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's something that a lot of us are addicted to, is our little pure protein bars. It's kind of like my Snickers or Mars bar that I used to have at night. And it's like a fooling yourself to think, well, I still need a bit of protein in my system for today. I've been tracking my food and I'm still allowed to have a protein bar.
Yeah. And then I remember when I did stuff like that, then I would be like, okay, can I have, like, the constant craving continues. It's like that song by K.D. Lang, Constant Craving.
I love that song.
So I've done my allotment for the day, but I'm still craving. So now can I go out and do a run for an hour, and that will buy me another bar or another something? There's something wrong with that picture. What's wrong with that picture is there's still an addiction that's moving on there. And just to make a point here, that I remember listening to a podcast where they were talking about the food industry, and that there's one industry that makes the bars for keto, it makes the bars for the weight loss folks, it makes the bars for the vegan. It's just like, we will make any bar you want, just tell us what the ingredients are that you want. And they've got to sell their products, so they're gonna pre-digest the stuff for you, so that anything, even oil, is potentially addictive, because you've made something that's a natural product heightened, so that you get more and it faster, and then it becomes slightly addictive to a lot addictive.
It's very interesting. When I grew up with European parents, my parents came from the Netherlands, and I always made this funny sort of comparison between the food the people eat in Holland and a meal that they would eat in Canada. In Canada, you'd say, what are you having for dinner? And they would say the meat product. Oh, tonight we're having steak. Tonight we're having pork chops. In Holland, When people say, what are you having tonight for dinner? And they say, oh, tonight we're having Brussels sprouts. Tonight we're having beans. Tonight we're having, cauliflower. So it's very interesting as far as the mindset with, and I talked about this in one of my blogs, cultural displacement syndrome, that many of us were brought up on not our own cultural type of foods, but a whole gamut of food, from Italian to Chinese to Turkish, Moroccan, whatever, and that together with these foods, we're not practicing the activities that would go normally with these foods. Like what I mentioned about growing up in Holland, people eat a lot of potatoes, a lot of French fries, but then afterwards they get on their bike and they bike to school or they bike to work.
Yeah. There's some great comments here. I can't read them, but it looks like there's some great stuff there.
Yeah. So I am, by the way, recording this Zoom meeting, and I hope that I have everybody's permission to be able to post this Zoom meeting on my Finding Wendy video. Is that okay? Can everybody give me a thumbs up? If they don't want to, then I can blur out your face if you want me to do that somehow. But I think that it's really important to share this information with other people, and that so that other people can, because I had a lot of comments from people that said they weren't able to be at today's Zoom meeting because they're working or they have something, then some other engagement. So I wanted to just ask whether or not it's possible to publish it in my Finding Wendy YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Are you okay with that, Vera?
Yes, I am. I'm just looking at a note here. Somebody's mentioning something about gout, which has been traditionally seen as a consequence of red meat and wine. And that maybe, I'm not sure if they were thinking that they couldn't do the keto or a higher protein because of that. One of the things we're discovering about gout, and with many other things, is that sugar is actually more of a culprit. Even with gallbladder disease, which we thought was related to the fat that a person ate, actually the sugar is more of the culprit that causes gout. And if you cut sugar out, that will, uric acid, which is the measure that we have, actually goes up with a higher amount, with the diabetic profile and with higher amounts of sugar. And it could be that some of these studies that have linked with gallbladder and with that gout, they never took out the sugar completely, so that it was always almost like a disguised, a hidden variable that was actually causing the problem. But I've seen many people be relieved of some of their other issues, not just obesity and diabetes and high blood pressure and basically metabolic syndrome, but things like gout get better too. So it's a very simple, not easy, but simple intervention that will resolve a lot of issues. It's just, it seems so hard. And it's only as hard as it seems because people are doing it so slowly, and it's like you're constantly in a craving mode.
So I wanted to ask now if there's anybody that wants to unmute themselves and ask Vera a question, a personal question that we haven't touched on, that you have a question about.
Yeah, if you have some comments, like some of these comments look really good. Yeah.
Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask.
Hi, it's Dorothy.
Hi, Dorothy.
I'm just wondering, a year out of bariatric surgery, I'm sort of at a loss at how much I'm supposed to be eating. So I don't know if this is the appropriate venue for this. Generally speaking, at my meals, I have a cup of food, whatever it is. And I just don't know, like, is that enough? Is it not enough?
It's one of the things that we learned at Renascent is that the people who had post-bariatric surgery, like that had surgery, and the different types of surgery required different food plans than regular folks. I would say that a cup of that, I don't know what else you're having, but that sounds pretty low to me. I heard somebody else saying that they do 1,200 calories. That also seems pretty low to me. I mean, I eat like 2,000 calories a day, but it's all complex carbs. It's all, it's more fat than it is. Like, I don't know how much of it is amount or caloric value as it is the actual food that you're eating. The more complex it is and the less carby it is, the better it is. But the specific about that, we had a dietitian who actually helps people, because you can't eat as much as somebody else. But you also want to be not hungry either, craving or hunger. Yeah.
So should we be counting calories? I have never counted calories, so
From a food addiction point of view, I would say no, but I don't know. I don't want to. I'm just talking from that point of view, and I'm not talking specifically to you because I don't know your story.
no, I understand.
Dorothy, I think what we can do is I can set up another Zoom meeting next week. I'm planning to do these Zoom meetings every week, by the way, every Sunday at 1 p.m. And we can actually talk about that sort of thing because a lot of us here, fellow bariatric patients from Toronto Western Hospital, we work very closely with a nutritionist. I'm 2 years out. Sandy is also, I think, 2 years out. And so we can talk about the calories, the carbs, the protein and stuff like that to help you.
And Wendy, I actually know about the guy who did the work for us at Renascent. So food addiction, also a new trained dietitian.
Okay.
With bariatric surgery. He might be willing to come on and do
that'd be great. If you can hook him up with me and then we'll set up another Zoom meeting with him. I think, would everybody be interested to that Zoom meeting as well? Thumbs up?
I'll connect up with him afterwards today.
All right. I think Veronica wanted to ask a question. You want to unmute yourself?
Thank you. I have a question about protein powders or the protein shakes, because I have a hernia. I cannot eat meats of any kind. And so my proteins basically come from dairy, which has some sugar, and eggs. How processed are those protein powders, and how is that interfering with the addiction to sugar that I've had since childhood?
Well, I guess my question to you would be: do you find that after you've had a meal, you're still craving food?
If I have a shake that is sweet, like the ones that are prepared, I crave sugar. Yes.
Yeah. So from an addiction point of view, anything that's been processed is already potentially more addictive because it's going to the brain more quickly. If it's sweet, that's already a sign that's that sounds to me like what Wendy said earlier, a real setup for basically an addictive lure, which is, you just said, yes, you still have cravings to eat. So if I were a food addict, I would avoid those things, and I would try my best just to eat real meat, like real food.
But I can't because of my hernia. That's why I'm having trouble getting my protein in.
Right. So then you have
and that's what the nutritionist said.
Yeah. So save that question, and maybe David or somebody can answer that later. But just to answer your question, yes, it is addictive.
Well, that's the issue, of course, with I'll get to you, Deborah, in a minute. So the question is, for a lot of post-bariatric surgery patients who are like in the early months, the 2, 3, 4 months, we have to make up our protein somehow. And when you use a protein powder or a protein shake, that's how we're able to get in our protein, because you're not able to eat solid foods. And especially if you have a pouch. And those protein drinks and the protein powders all have sugar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Deborah, go ahead. You had a question.
Yeah, so you just reminded me. I said I wasn't on sugars, but I am, because I'm drinking protein drinks because I'm the one with gout.
Yeah.
And I've had to go to them because the doctors told me to get, well, I've worked with the nutritionist and they don't know what to do with me because I also have celiac. But so I'm doing a lot of milk products, just like, who was it that said that? Veronica, I think.
Yeah.
And they have sugars, of course. But I have to. I mean, I eat a lot of Greek yogurt now. And PB Fit, the powdered peanut butter.
Yes.
Because I have to find a way. I've started adding in, because now I'm on some allopurinol. So again, medications that I hope it doesn't make me gain weight. But I'm only 5 months out. I've done well so far. I've lost 85 pounds so I'm doing well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm within the guidelines, and I had the VSG, the sleeve.
Mm-hmm.
And, but I think about, and I know I'm addicted to sugar. I know I can't have things in the house.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I can't have stuff that are slider foods like chips or, the processed foods. I'm a processed food addict. I mean, I'm here in America, we have giant sized everythings and,
Yeah.
and more sugar in all of our processed foods. And because I have celiac, the processed foods for a celiac have way more sugar than other things.
Yeah.
So I've given all of that up.
Good.
But I guess, I guess I just have to just keep testing things. I mean, my program is in my view, crazy. 600 calories a day, 20 total carbs or less.
Oh.
Wow.
And
very little.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm doing 700. I mean, I've talked to him and I said, and I'm going over my carbs. I said, I'll try to keep it 20 net carbs.
Yeah.
But right now I've got to have some vegetables, people. I can't just eat meat.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But I've had to add protein powder, so I'm not off sugar. So I really need to find a way to get rid of that.
Yeah. Boy, there's no company that makes protein. Oh, I feel.
Well, I mean, I have to check mine. I use the ones they recommended, but I'm sure there's sugar in it.
Yeah.
But there's no carbs, so there can't be that much sugar.
Yeah.
It's a 0 carb one. I mean, some of them, of course, have high carbs. So.
And Marla has a question.
Hey, Marla.
Hi, sorry I joined late, but thank you, Vera, and I can't wait to see the recording of this. If I can just address Deborah for a moment, I know when I had to have the protein powders, I mean, I was still using sweeteners, so there are many of them that are made, and there are some that are a lot healthier. And I found ways around them. I mean, I was eating fruit, so I would put in the powdered peanut butter and fruit, whatever. But for now, if these are the things you have to do, but I don't know how far you said you were out, but I'm just coming up on 8 years, and I eat almost identically to Vera. I eat 40 ounces of vegetables a day. As a bypass patient, I eat my normal protein, not like I ever did. I still have restriction, but I was one of the few that are able to eat this quantity. And it's just been an amazing transformation. I gave up the sweetener 2 years ago. So if you work towards that, you will be able to find, use milk to add powdered milk and less protein powder. It'll give you protein.
Marla, did you have to build over the years that amount of vegetable quantity?
Well, when I came into your program, I was still very restrictive to my dense proteins, but for the most part, unless it was just parsnip, carrots, cauliflower, and broccoli, which it usually was, I had no problem with most of the vegetables. And I honestly, as you know, Vera, I was on 20 ounces at night, and I'm up to 24, speaking to you about it. And I'm fine with it. And I even spoke to my bariatric surgeon about it. And, I said, am I going to break my stomach? And he said, if you can do it, and that's what's keeping you abstinent and sane, he said, then go ahead. I still have restriction around the heavy, dense proteins. The heavy, dense, that's an oxymoron. But so, Deborah, if you want to reach out, I can leave you thank you for letting me speak.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Dr. Tarman, thank you so very, very much for all of this. I'm finding out so much information. I have a question, Dr. Tarman, briefly about the oxalates that are in all the vegetables we're consuming. I love vegetables myself, but all this new info about oxalates, is there an issue with the cooking of them and everything? Can you discuss that? Thank you.
No, I don't want to. That's more nutritional stuff, and that's out of my realm. Yeah, I know there's some concern. but I don't want it. Save that one for maybe David. He's good at that stuff. Okay.
Does anybody else have some questions? If
Hey,
they want
Jody.
I just have a comment. I'm Karen.
Oh.
And hi, I'm a 7-year-old bariatric patient. I was patient at Renascent 4 years ago, and I have not had sugar, grains, or flour in the 4 years since then. And I just wondered, Dr. Tarman, I know it's more nutrition, but could you maybe touch on for people the difference between added sugar and naturally occurring sugar? Like people are talking about there's sugar in Greek yogurt. Well, that's because it's so. Could you maybe expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So added sugar is sugar that you literally add to something. So if you have plain Greek yogurt and you add sugar into it, you make it sweet. But there is there's naturally occurring sugars in any dairy product. And mainly when we talk about added sugars versus whatever, it's fruit. Like fruit is very sweet. So is it okay to have fruit? And the general concept is that if it's within a natural context, like fruit with the apple and the fiber and the skin, it's okay because the natural package that nature puts it in curbs the amount that you can possibly eat in a day. You really can't eat more than a few pieces of fruit in a day, and that's safe. But if you take it out and make it refined sugar, then that's too much sugar. Like the liver can't process all that fructose. It just can't do it. So that's the difference. Is sugar in fruit, in vegetables, like beets. I mean, we make beet sugar. So can we eat beets? Yes, we can, because we're eating the beet itself. And similarly, corn on the cob. Yes, we can eat corn, but high fructose corn syrup, which is what our pop is made of and all of our pastries, we can't eat. So that's the difference. And then stuff like dairy has a lot of sugar, but if you're not too bad on the spectrum, like Marla was mentioning earlier, it might be one of those bridged areas where it's okay. It's better to have yogurt than ice cream. And if that's what helps you get your protein, and you're not craving too much after, not the sweetened stuff, I'm talking about the plain stuff, the high fat stuff, the Greek yogurt that's plain, that's okay, unless you're so far gone with the addiction that it just makes you crave. But it's a perfect medium. Like Marla, you were saying, you did that for a few years, it's fine. So I hope I answered your question, Karen. And it was a good question because people ask that all the time. What about fruit? Yes, fruit is fine.
Yeah, the day old, the fructose discussion, fructose, but we're all becoming professional nutritionists after with this whole journey.
Yeah.
And it is a lifelong journey that, of course, the entire diet industry bases every single diet on short term. So it is a long-term commitment in order to be successful in any way. If you decide to cut sugar and flour out, or what journey you take, and what is your experience? Now, we have heard now from two people that have followed this non-sugar lifestyle. Is it what's the percentage of people that are successful and not successful?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question. We actually have a documentary out by the way, for people who are interested, I have a Facebook group page that's called I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life, and please join that if you want to get support. I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life support group. And on that page, we talk about this documentary, which is a documentary about 14 people who have maintained weight loss and a sugar-free life for years. What was the common ingredient in that process? Well, the first common ingredient was you had to quit sugar and actually stay off of it, because that takes the craving away, so that actually living a sugar-free life is not hard at all. Like, please, I actually have to get off soon, so I do want to leave a message of hope here, which is that if you quit sugar, it's a free life. It's not a deprived life. And it's actually easy to put years and years and years behind you. So that's the number one thing. You have to quit sugar, get through that first 2 or 3 weeks of what feels like insanity. And then it gets quiet, and then you're free, as long as you don't pick up again. But the other common ingredient for people who do succeed, which is not, like I said, it's a loaded question, Wendy. It's not that many people, is that they follow the tools. Some of those tools may seem extreme, like the weighing and measuring, for example. The very strict rules around, like I don't go to buffets, if I'm going to a party, I eat ahead of time, like all those kind of rules. The people who follow, it's this classic thing in the addiction world, it works if you work it. So if you do all the things that you say you're going to do and continually do them, it works, and it really does work. Where people fail, which I would say probably it's a 30% succeed wonderfully. It's just like in any addiction. 30% are middling and 30% fail objectively. Abject failure, yeah. And we can help that middle crowd. You gotta work the program, whatever that program is, which means you stay on the food that you're gonna stay on, follow the rules that you're planning, which for some people is calling somebody every day and saying, this is what I eat every day and I'm not gonna sway from this. And then the third thing is you have to get social support, like this Zoom meeting, like my Facebook group, like 12-step meetings. You have to get on a daily basis. I have a food addict that I'm following these rules, because when we go out there in the world, it's all about have more of this, have some of this. And we're social animals and we will succumb. Like it's a guarantee. Unless we have
and it's very similar to what they have in the Alcoholic Anonymous, that you have a sponsor.
Yeah.
So if you're having to talk to someone, because my issue, sometimes I talk to my sisters about, my plan or my journey, and they don't want to hear about it. Right. So that a lot of people that have family members who don't want anything to do with your journey because of jealousy or whatever, competition or whatever. But within our own bariatric community, and this, again, a great platform with the Zoom meeting, that you can reach out and get a sponsor and just say, please stop me from eating this bag of chips, or please talk me out of this, eating this entire bag of peanuts. I mean, we've all been through stages. I've been through stages where I have food in the house and I think, okay, I'm just going to have a little bit, and then I finish the bag.
Yeah.
And it's that you talk about nuts and seeds are part of the diet of not sugar. My biggest crush is peanuts. I can't have them in the house.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's right. I understand that. Yeah. So if I can just close up my section just by sort of ending on a message of hope that, well, first of all, the support. Oh, and we also talked about sense of meaningfulness as being an important piece too. Anyway, that's really important too. But anyway, please, if you're used to doing things on your own, I want to do this on my own, you have to let go of that one. This food is just too primal. It's too integral to our animalistic nature that we need support, because stinking thinking will take over and you will talk yourself into eating something that you don't want to eat. So you want to have support regularly. And the good news is that once you've stopped, that 2 to 3 weeks, it's the battle is no longer about cravings, because they're gone. The battle is, how do I not fall back and believe that I can have a little bit? It's all about the stinking thinking and the social pressures to go back to eating the way that you did before. And if you have a good, solid social support system that will help you deal with that, that's where you get long-term sobriety.
And so on behalf of everybody here, I want to thank you so much, Vera, for talking with us. And you did talk about maybe doing a follow-up Zoom meeting, maybe at another time in a month or two, and see how we're all doing with the COVID-19 weight gain.
Yeah, maybe I could do it with David. I'll try to organize something with David tonight.
Yeah, and I just wanted to mention to all the participants that are here online now is that I can stay for another hour if anybody wants to stay behind and have a discussion of what we heard and what we learned from Vera. That definitely, I'll keep the Zoom meeting going. But thank you so much, Vera, for joining us today. And again, I'll be posting this whole recording on my Finding Wendy YouTube channel. And please, everybody, buy her book. And
Yes.
if you can find it on Amazon, and it really is, information is, knowledge is key in our journey. And as a professional horn player, I worked with the best teachers in the world. But we as professional dieters or professional recovering addicts, we need the best teachers in the world to help our journey be successful.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Vera, and we will see you next time.
Okay, thank you.
Everybody do jazz hands.